Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Paul Gannett, and I'm going to be hosting the webinar today. And we'll be talking about the new HOBO MicroRX Station. Let's see, just making sure I got everything set here. This is, hopefully everybody's hearing me, but this is for those who might not be hearing me. I just wanted to give them a chance to check their audio settings. One thing I'll note while they're checking those settings is your control panel may look slightly different than the one shown here. That's okay. Hopefully I think all the same functionality should be enabled though. So I don't see any notes that people aren't getting the audio, so I'm going to continue on. I will say that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards, so you can refer back to it. It'll run for about 50 minutes, including some time for questions. And basically, I'll stick around as long as there's questions. I want to make sure that as much as possible, I get your questions answered. And I do want to say that, well, here's where you can enter your questions in. And feel free to ask questions as we go along. If it looks like it's appropriate to address at the time, I'll address it then. If it's going to be better addressed later on, I'll cover it later on in the presentation. And again, if we don't get to something during the presentation, I have some time for Q&A at the end where we can address questions. So just a brief introduction to Onset. We've been in the business of making data loggers since 1981, so we've got a lot of experience making the HOBO data loggers and weather stations that we keep building on. And we do have a global network of distributors, so I noticed that many of you are in other countries, so you should be able to find a local distributor that can help you out with buying and deploying our products. So I've been with Onset now for some over 22 years, and basically I've had the pleasure of working with our engineers to develop our line of outdoor data loggers and weather stations and wireless sensors. So I think, that's been a great experience working with a lot of you in research and agriculture, universities. Here's the lineup of topics for today, just so you have a sense for the overall plan. First, we're going to start out with an overview of the MicroRX and its some of its key features. Then we'll talk a little bit about the software that's used to configure it. Then we'll just show some example applications. You probably have your own applications. And then I'll do a little comparison to some of the other HOBO stations so you can get a feel for how they're positioned against one another. Talk a little bit about accessories that are available to go with these stations. And then, as I mentioned, some time for Q&A at the end for anything I haven't already covered. So I'm going to start out with just a couple of questions to give me a feel for where you're at, what your background is. So the first is, the question is about what is your primary field of work, and I'll launch that. And that should give you a chance to select which applies to you. So click on the appropriate box. I'll let this run for half a minute or so, and then I'll share the results with you. One of the things I noticed, a lot of you were in water resource management. That was one thing that came up in the forms that you filled in when you registered. So I don't have a choice for that here, but feel free to fill that in the questions box. Okay, interesting. So I think I've got a good sense here for where you're at. So let me close this and share the results with you. Let's see. As you can see, our biggest segment of folks is in environmental research. Half of you are in that area, so that makes a lot of sense. also a fair number in agriculture research, and a quarter of you are in other fields. So I'm just looking at some of those. Let's see, I see dam safety, forensic science, I'm sorry, alternative energy. Those are good. So hopefully, yeah, I think we've got good good material for each of you here. So what I'm going to do is go on to the next poll question, which is just to get a sense for what your experience is with HOBO weather stations. I certainly don't want to repeat things that you already know. So let's see, let me line that up, launch that, and I'll give you a chance to select the appropriate box for your situation. Let's see. All right. Pretty quickly seeing a pattern develop here. And so I think I'm going to close out of this. So I think we see the pattern already. Clearly, the majority of you have not used HOBO weather stations. So this will give you a good overview of what they can do. And some of you have used our standalone data loggers, and some of you have used our other remote monitoring stations. So some of this will be reviewed for those of you who have been using the RX3000s. So let's, oops, you know what? I forgot to share the results with you. Here the results are, so you can see them. Sorry about that. And so you can see for yourself. Now I'm going to hide those results and continue on with the webinar. So here we go. So the MicroRX, here's one deployed out in the woods. Some of the high-level features of it are that it has 5 inputs for our smart sensors, our plug-and-play smart sensors, and it does also support the full 15 channels. And the reason I mention that is because some of our sensors have multiple channels of data, like our wind sensor provides wind speed, wind gust, as well as wind direction. That counts as 3 channels, but it only requires 1 sensor input on the station. So I'll just give you a feel for that. The MicroRX station is especially easy to deploy because of its small size. You can get a sense for the size of it there next to the rain gauge. It can easily be mounted with zip ties to a mast, and it has an integrated solar panel, so you don't have to attach a separate solar panel. It's built right into the front if you've got the solar powered models. And as I mentioned, it's got the plug-and-play smart sensors, which are self-describing sensors, so that the station automatically knows that you've got a temperature sensor, and it should display the data in either degrees Fahrenheit or degrees Celsius, depending upon which units of measure you've set it in your preferences. And this new station also adds an optional water level sensor and integrated flow calculations. It's the sensor is attached with a cable, which we'll talk more about the cables and sensor choices later on in the presentation, and also the integrated flow calculations. And another thing I think you'll like about these stations is their affordable pricing, starting at $560 in the U.S. and cellular service plans starting at $150 per year. This station is compatible with Onset's full line of plug-and-play smart sensors, and you can see the range of measurements that we provide with those smart sensors. We also have calculated evapotranspiration included in our software that derives that from the wind, solar radiation, temperature, humidity data. We also have some adapters for 4 to 20 milliamp and 0 to 5 volt or pulse sensors. Those voltage and current input sensors will require an external enclosure to use those adapters, but they are available if you have some sensors other than those shown here. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have an optional built-in water level sensor input, which includes a barometric pressure sensor for compensating for barometric pressure changes. So here's the models that are available. There's basically 4 versions of the MicroRX. The first 2 do not include the optional water level sensor input. One is battery powered. I'll talk more in detail about that in a minute. And the second model has the built-in solar panel, so that it recharges the battery pack, a rechargeable battery pack. And the last 2 models include the water level sensor input and the same variations of with a battery pack or with a solar panel. One thing I wanted to mention is the ones that have the optional water level sensor input, so the 2103 and 2104, they include an integrated barometric pressure sensor, and you can even use that barometric pressure sensor if you don't have a water level sensor attached. It's it works fine as a barometric pressure logger. So let me give you a little tour. Seeing you don't have a unit in front of you, I'll give you a little feel for what it looks like. And let's see, we'll just kind of click through. Oops, I'm sorry. Click through. There we go. The first thing is it's all packaged in a IP66 NEMA 4X enclosure. Really robust. It's designed for use in harsh environments where a lot of you do your work, so that you get many years of use out of it. It does have integrated mounting ears for mounting it either with screws, zip ties, or U-bolts. It has an LCD display. For those of you who have been using the RX3000s, it's basically the same display as used there. And this provides detailed status information, which is useful when you're setting up the station, as well as if you have to do any troubleshooting. A couple of my favorite features on this is there's a start-stop button. So if you want to stop it and add new sensors and then start it again, you can do that from right there. And then it's also got, this is my favorite button, the cloud button. This is used to make a connection from the station to the internet at any time. So if you want to get the latest sensor readings uploaded to the internet, just press that button. It will connect, upload those readings to the internet. Very handy during troubleshooting. You'll be surprised how many times you'll use that when you're out at the station getting the system set up. And this is for the models, the 2103 and the 2104 models that have the optional water level sensor input. That's what it looks like. It plugs in there, and then it also has a couple of screws that go into a strain relief that makes it really sturdy for you can actually suspend the water level sensor and cable from that from the station directly if you want. As I mentioned, it has inputs for 5 of our smart sensors. Those just plug in here. They kind of look like, for those who haven't seen them, they look a lot like phone jacks. So and they've got that little tab that locks them in place, so they're securely held in place. And then you would route the wires for the sensor cables out the cable seal in the bottom. Speaking of that, right now I show that cable seal with the weatherproof plugs installed in all of them. As you use the openings in that cable seal for the cables, you just swing the cable plugs out, but they're attached to the that cable plug seal so that you don't lose them. So you can add and remove sensors and their cables very easily that way. It has a SIM slot up at the top. Now, most people prefer to order these stations from us with a SIM already installed. It just makes it easier to deploy, and you can get the data plan through us. Some users, especially international users, like to provide their own SIMs. You can do that as well. That's where you would install it. If you do supply your own SIM, you've got to do a little bit of software configuration to get the data sent to the right APN, and then you can make arrangements for your own cellular data plan with your local providers. We also do have a built-in USB interface. The primary way you get your data and do your configuration is all through the internet. So most of you will never need to use that USB interface, but it's handy to know that it's there. If you lose connectivity, you can use that interface to do emergency offload of your data. Because even if for some reason you lose internet connectivity, the station continues to log the data, and this gives you a way of getting that data out. Over in the door of the station is where the batteries will go. If you have the solar-powered version, it's a rechargeable battery pack. Or if you've got the battery-powered version, it'll be 6 AA lithium batteries installed right there in the door of the station. And those are a couple of latches to secure the cover of the station closed, get that nice weatherproof seal. They've got little tabs in them, so you can put little padlocks in if you want to discourage somebody from tampering with your station. So that's been the outside tour. Let me talk a little bit more about some of the features of the MicroRX. It's very small. It's less than 8 inches tall, or 20 centimeters, including the mounting ears. As you can see, it's got the integrated solar panel or battery power. And if you're using the mounting ears, those inner holes are for the zip ties. You can put I think it's up to eighth inch zip ties through there. We'll hold it both on the top tab and the bottom tab. It'll hold it securely in place. You can put U-bolts or screws in those outer holes. Mounting it on a mast up to 1 5/8 inches. So looking at the solar-powered models, the 2102 and the 2104, it's a 1.7 watt solar panel that they come with. This will support a 10-minute connection rate year-round for latitudes up to 40 degrees from the equator. Yeah, you can. Basically, it's a real-time station just off of that built-in solar panel. For people that are further to the north or to the south, you might have to slow it down during the winter season if you're continuing to use it during the winter season to a 30-minute connection rate with that solar panel. Or you can add an external solar panel. The ones we sell for our other stations, either 5 watt or 15 watt external solar panels can be added as well. And those are also useful for sites that have less access to sun, like in a forested area. You might want to use those bigger solar panels. So now looking at the battery-powered models, as I mentioned, those are run off of 6 AA lithium batteries that get installed inside the door, and those are user replaceable. And this is great for deployments that are not in a location where it's got exposure to the sun, such as if you're in a deep tree canopy, perhaps, or a crop canopy, or in other cases, some of you want to deploy stations where nobody can see them, so you might want to put it in some sort of plastic enclosure to hide it from people, and then just use the battery-powered model. Or the other choice with if you want to put it in a security enclosure is use one of the solar-powered models with the external solar panel, so that the only thing exposed is the external solar panels. The other reason you might want to consider the battery-powered model is it does have an extended temperature range down to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Let's see. The one trade-off, of course, with the battery-powered models is the connection rate is slower because the cellular communications does take a fair amount of power each time. But the batteries do provide enough power for daily connections for up to a full year. And if you need data faster, you can get hourly connections for up to 3 months with the 2101. That's the version without the water level sensor. And hourly connections for over 2 months with the 2103 with the water level sensors. Of course, if you're in an area with a weak cellular connection or you're using water level and very fast logging rates, you might get slower or shorter battery lives. But again, you can replace those as needed with commonly available AA lithium batteries. As I mentioned, there is an optional water level sensor input. Those are the models 2103 and 2104. That adds several additional measurements: water pressure, barometric pressure, then the difference between those, differential pressure, as well as water temperature. And those parameters can be used in our HOBOlink software to directly calculate the water level. You can also set up water level alarms within the station to notify you if water level gets above a critical level or below a critical level. And our software will also allow you to convert that water level data to water flow if you're using a weir or a flume, such as shown here in this picture. Great for monitoring stream flows, for example, or irrigation flows where you've got perhaps a rectangular weir in an irrigation channel. You can monitor the flow rates with the station very easily, and our software provides that data. One of the things about our water level sensors is we use non-vented sensors. We choose to use these because they provide the highest reliability and less maintenance. You don't have to change desiccants or worry about water or moisture getting into vent tubes. There's a question about ordering the models with the water level sensor input. If you order the models 2103 or the 2104, those models will include the input for the water level sensor. You have to buy the cable and the sensor separately. And those are the last two lines on this slide. The water level sensor comes in 4 different ranges. So you order the water level sensor with the measurement range that you need. And then you can order a cable up to 400 meters in length. So that should cover most of your applications. One thing I also wanted to say is if you order these models with the water level sensor input, that is in addition to the 5 smart sensor inputs. You still get the 5 smart sensor inputs. Another feature, it's kind of subtle, but can be useful in some applications, is that we've added accumulated rainfall alarms. This allows you to set up a moving window that rainfall is accumulated over. And as soon as the rainfall within that window exceeds the threshold you set, it'll trigger an alarm, and it's an immediate connection. Because it's checking for this alarm condition inside the station, and the station is smart enough to say, "Oh, the rainfall total exceeded the limit, so I'm going to send a notification." Or I'm going to connect to HOBOlink, and that'll send out the notification either as a text message or an email or both to whatever the user has selected. And those rainfall accumulations are calculated after each logging interval. So if you're logging if you're logging data at a 1-minute logging rate inside your station, it's calculating the new accumulation window every minute. And so, for example, it can be accumulating rainfall over the last 6 hours, and it's calculating that every minute. It's updating that count for what that total is. Another thing to note, though, is this data that's being used to trigger the alarms is not logged because it wouldn't be very meaningful to have that moving window of data. If you want to get accumulated rainfall data, then you're better off using HOBOlink to calculate that data. We have a calculated channel within HOBOlink that will provide rainfall, over every hour or every day, however you want to add it up. I mentioned the display. Here's just a closer look at it. It provides logger status information, and it has that cloud button. I think I actually covered most of this. Just a little closer look. HOBOlink is the interface to the station. This is where you access your data as well as configure the station. I'll talk about configuring the station in a couple of slides. And here's just some of the features of HOBOlink. You can easily set up your own custom dashboard that shows the parameters that are most important to you. We've got these kind of current conditions widgets, like seeing the current temperature or barometric pressure or whatever sensors you have connected, or you can look at the data in trend graphs, and those trend graphs can be over the last day, last week, so different time periods that you can select. We also have map views, which is useful if you want to look at the conditions of several stations and get kind of a more global picture of what's happening. We also have optional public access of both dashboards or a map view, so you can share the information that your station is showing with other users very easily without having to give them your password. And it also allows you to embed these dashboards in your own websites. For example, we have a lot of users that will want to create a dashboard to show current weather conditions in their lobby, so they can easily create their own lobby display panel that feeds over to their dashboard showing the current weather conditions. There's some data feed capabilities to Weather Underground, NUA, which is a crop management network in the northeastern part of the United States, which is managed out of Cornell University, but it provides some pretty powerful crop management tools for people and growers in those states. HOBOlink is also the source for your historical data storage. It basically keeps a continuous archive of all your data, and then you can at any time go in and select which sensors, which stations, what time frame you want to extract the data for, and easily get that data exported. Let's see, I saw a couple questions coming in. One I'm going to get to in a minute. Let's see. One thing I should have mentioned is for NUA, if you want to find out more about NUA, you can easily look up their site. It's just NUA, newa.cornell.edu, and you can get a good sense for the station there, and there's links within that page to signing up and adding your own station to their network. Let's see. Oh, there's a question about if you have more than one station set up with non-vented transducers, do you use only one barometric pressure logger at one station for water level correction? And that's a good question. The way these stations are set up, the HOBO MicroRX stations that have the water level sensor input, each station will have its own barometric pressure sensor, so you don't need to share that barometric compensation between the different stations. And it just makes it easier for you to get the data from that station without having to link it to some other station. So you'll be able to directly get that water level data as a separate data channel from each of your stations. And our software, provides that directly. There's no other than you have to enter in your reference water level and your water type for doing the density. But really, that's all you have to do to get your water level data. There's a question about how does it build a weather file. I don't know. I don't think I have a good screen of that here in this presentation, but basically it goes into you go into a section which is getting data, doing exports, we call them. So you want to select an export, and then you go into a screen where you select your date range. It's got a little calendar, so you can select your date range, and if you want to even start in the middle of the day, you can do that. Select the time, and then you can select the stations you want data from, and then the sensors within those stations you want to get data. So it's pretty easy to set up, very, very intuitive. Oh, here's another question in terms of the water level sensors, and that's how many water level sensors can you have per station? And it's just one water level sensor per station. It's just the station's pretty small, so it's just got the room for the one water level sensor per station. We may add capabilities for multiple water level sensors in our larger stations at some point, but right now it's just one water level sensor per station. Oh, here's an interesting question. This is from a user that has a MX 2001 logger already. That's our standalone water level logger, and he's wondering if he can use the sensor and cable with the MicroRX station. And the answer is partially yes. You can use, it's exactly the same water level sensors that are used with the MicroRX station as is used with the MX 2001s. The cables are different, so you would need to buy a different cable. So good question. I love having questions. It keeps it fresh and dynamic. Hopefully, it's not too distracting for relative to the presentation, but I think it makes it more interesting because these are the questions that you have, the topics that are most interesting. So I should also mention that all of our stations, the new RX 2100s as well as the RX 3000s, have station-side alarms, which provide immediate notification. So if you want to set up a temperature alarm or a wind alarm, at the end of each logging interval, so if it's logging every 5 minutes, it's going to check every 5 minutes for the latest conditions, and it detects some conditions are outside of the alarms that you set, either too high, too low. It's going to contact HOBOlink immediately, and then HOBOlink will send out the notification. So within a couple of minutes, the time that it takes to make that connection and send out the notifications, those notifications are going out. It doesn't have to wait for the next scheduled data offload, which is important if you're only doing readouts every hour, for example. You don't necessarily want to wait for that next hourly readout to get your alarm notifications. So I'm going to talk a little bit about using HOBOlink now. And one important thing to keep in mind is that you can run HOBOlink on either your mobile devices or your desktop browser. Of course, it's a little bit easier in some cases to set up and configure the station on a desktop or laptop computer. But you can, all the functions, or most all of the functions, are available on a mobile device as well. And to do it, you plug in your smart sensors. The station automatically recognizes what sensors are plugged in. You plug in your power, to the battery, solar panel, and that powers up the station. It connects to the internet, and then you can go into these screens for configuring your station. And this is, I'm not going to show you all the screens, but I'll give you a sense. Basically, there's this configuration menu that's going to guide you through the steps. So you just kind of do a step, and then you press next, it'll take you to the next step, or you can skip ahead if you want. So general configuration is just going to be things like what time zone are you in. Then the readout configuration is this screen that I'm showing here, and this is where you set your connection interval. So if you've got a battery-powered station, you might want to have it only connect every couple of hours to extend your battery life. So I've entered in 2-hour connection interval here into to my readout configuration. Then the next screen is module configuration. And a module is either smart sensor module, we call it, or the water level sensing module. In this case, this is the water level sensors module. And here's where you set your logging rate. So in this case, I've set it for 15-minute logging. It is interesting to note that you can have different logging rates between your water level sensor and the rest of your sensors in your MicroRX station. Although typically most people will have them logging at the same interval, but you can have different rates if you want. So, and then this 15-minute logging interval will be used for all of these sensors that are associated with the water level sensor module. And as I mentioned, because they're plug-and-play smart sensors, you don't have to do any sensor configuration. The one thing that sometimes people want to do is they might want to add labels. So especially if you've got multiple temperature sensors, you might want to label what each of the temperature sensors is measuring. One could be measuring water temperature, another one could be measuring soil temperature. So in that case, you'd select that sensor and enter in the appropriate label. Let's see a few questions in here. Let me see if any of them are good to answer at this point. So I'm going to pause for a second. Okay, this is a good question. As I've mentioned a few times that we have 5 smart sensor inputs built into the station. It is possible if you want to add more smart sensors into the station, we do have an expansion box. So you can order the expansion box and run the a connection cable to that expansion box and add in additional sensors. So I think each expansion box will add an additional 6 more smart sensor inputs. So that's an option if you want to get a little bit more expansion. Or the other option, of course, is to buy our RX3000, which has 10 smart sensor inputs. I'll talk a little bit more about deciding between our stations later on. Let's see. Interesting. There's a question about configuring somebody who has the 2104 station, but they're not seeing the water level sensor option. We probably should follow up with you on that. But yeah, basically, yeah, if you've got, you do have to start this stage, or you have to have the water level sensor connected to see the water level sensor options. You'll get the barometric pressure data, but you do have to have the sensor connected to see all the full range of choices like water level. So make sure that sensor is connected. And analog and digital inputs. Yes, if you have sensors that have analog or digital or pulse outputs, we do have adapters for connecting those types of sensors. You will have to use those adapters in that same expansion box that I was just mentioning about for adding additional sensors beyond the 5 built-in smart sensor inputs. So good questions. So a little bit more on configuring your station in HOBOlink. One of the features is the alarm notification. So in this case, this is the screen for setting up a temperature alarm. So you just select which temperature sensor you want to alarm on. You can set up alarms for either above or below or outside of a range of temperatures. And then you enter in your temperature. In this case, I'm kind of visualizing it's a frost alarm. So when the temperature goes below 1 degree Celsius for one logged data point, then I want it to trigger an alarm. Then you can also set up what you want it to clear on, and that clear threshold can be at a separate threshold. That gives you a little bit of hysteresis, so you're not, going back and forth between alarm trigger and alarm clears when you're right at that threshold. So this gives you a little bit of hysteresis, eliminate some of that noise. And then here's where you set up what actions you want to take on that alarm conditions. You can send a text message, you can send an email, and you can set up as many of these actions as you want. So there is a practical limit. I forget what it is, but if you want to notify 20 different people, you can set that up here just by adding actions and entering in their contact information. And you can also decide whether you want to send a notification on clear or not. So if you've got a rainfall sensor, the alarm configuration screen for the accumulated rainfall alarms is a little different. You select a sensor, then you select that it's an accumulated rainfall alarm, and then you set in the threshold for what your total accumulation is in the accumulation period. So in this case, I set my threshold at 10 millimeters over a 4-hour period. And again, the same choices for your different actions. We also have system alarms, which are useful for notifying you if there's any problems with your system, which is important in a lot of cases. If you're doing alarms on other sensors, for example, you'll want to know if there's been a misconnection, because you want to know if your station for some reason isn't connecting, so you can set up an alarm notification for if it doesn't connect for an hour in this case, and after it's done its last 2-hour connection interval, it sends you a notification. It says it's not connecting. So you might want to get out there and check why it's not connecting. Maybe the the cellular network's down or whatever. It could be any number of things, but it gives you some notification that you might miss an alarm notification. And then there's notifications down below on the device area. These are just check boxes. If the battery gets low, it can send you an alarm notification. Or if there's a sensor failure. And this is handy. Just sometimes the wires get cut, for whatever reason. This will tell you you've got a bad sensor, and so you can get out there and replace that sensor before you lose any more data. So those are very useful. Let me check. I've got some more questions here. Let's see if any of these are good to answer now. Let's see. Oh, there's a question about the compatibility on the accumulated rainfall alarms. And we actually sell a couple of different models of rainfall collectors. One is based on the Texas Electronics rain gauges, and one is based on the Davis. And that accumulated rainfall alarm supports both of those rain gauges, both metric and US increment version. So no matter what the rain gauge, they will be supported. Yeah, there's just somebody double checking on the alarms as to when they're sent, whether it gets sent at the next readout interval or automatically when the threshold value is reached. The alarms are sent immediately when that threshold value is reached, as determined by the logging interval. So if you're logging every 15 minutes, it's checking that that alarm condition every 15 minutes. If you want to get fastest alarm notifications, you probably want to set up a 1-minute logging rate so that it's checking as frequently as possible, and you'll get notified as soon as that threshold is reached. So let's see. Oh, creating custom dashboards. You can see some of the widgets that are available. You can set up a line chart with multiple parameters. You can set up bar charts, which is useful for things like rainfall data, area charts, kind of gauge charts, thermometers, wind rose charts, just kind of a tabular chart which just lists the current conditions on multiple sensors. So a lot of different types of widgets you can configure very easily, and do all sorts of color and line size, formatting, all the kind of the things you're getting used to these days. You can move them around. That's what these little arrows are, to move the widgets around to different places in your layout. So you put the most important stuff at the top. This little wrench is what you use to go in and edit your widgets that you've created. So you can create very professional looking dashboards using these tools, and it's pretty easy to do. So that's kind of been a quick tour of HOBOlink and setting up the MicroRX station. So let me skip over to some applications. Egg research and commercial egg are both common applications for this. A lot of these pictures are from our beta testers who were testing these before we did the final product release. So Some of the things that they liked about them were the compact size. They could easily fit it into their research orchard and getting the immediate notification of critical field conditions. And this particular beta tester was part of the NUA network, so he was glad that it was compatible with that. Another tester was doing irrigation research, so likes the integrated solar panel, just made it real easy to mount on a fence post out there in the field. And another thing, we talked a little bit about this before, is the export capability. You can easily export the data to other programs for more detailed statistical analysis of the data, correlate with other data that you're gathering. Another interesting application is urban climate studies. Urban environments can have their own microclimates and dynamics. So the small size of this station makes it easy to mount in different places. You can mount it up high, where it's not going to get tampered with, or you can mount them a little more discreetly so it doesn't, sometimes you don't want to have a station that's standing out like a sore thumb. You want it to kind of blend in with the environment where you're monitoring the conditions. So this allows you to do that. It's also got an optional AC adapter, so you can run it off of AC power if that's available. There's a question about the Davis rain gauge I talked about briefly. We resell the Davis rain gauge, and we sell it with our own smart sensor adapter, so it can be plugged directly into our station, so you don't have to do any fancy wiring or programming. And water level and flow monitoring opens up applications in hydrology, stream flow monitoring, irrigation water use, storm water management. And the price point of this station, starting at under $600, allows you to, it makes it practical to use this even if you're only looking to alarm off of one or two parameters. For example, you might just be interested in creating a temperature alarm station to let you know when your vacation cabin is getting too cold or something. You need to go out there and turn on your generator or whatever. The applications are really only limited by your imagination and budgets. This slide is just kind of a comparison of the MicroRX versus the other HOBO stations. And in particular, I'm comparing it to the other web-enabled weather stations. So here's the HOBO MicroRX, which is in this price range. If you want more expandability and power, then we've got the HOBORX 3000 station, which is up in the $1,000 price range. And then for the greatest expandability, HOBOnet, which has the ability to add in up to 50 wireless sensors. Gives you a lot of flexibility. You can create very powerful monitoring networks with our HOBOnet system, which actually ties into our RX 3000 as the gateway for getting that data to the internet. I also included down here, we still are offering our HOBO USB microstation, which is a very affordable solution if you want to do data logging only, and you can go out to the station and offload the data with your laptop computer. Same set of sensors, works with all of these. It's just, basically a trade-off in price and functionality. So here's just kind of another way of framing that question is if you're trying to decide is what's most important for your application, expandability or price and simplicity. If you're looking for the simplest solution and the lowest price, then you probably want to start out looking at the HOBO MicroRX first with its 5 smart sensor inputs and optional water level sensor input. If you're looking for the most expandability, then look at the RX 3000. It's got more inputs, and it's also got module slots, which can accept modules for analog inputs, relays for controlling devices, turning devices on and off, as well as the ability to expand into HOBOnet with the wireless sensors as shown in the picture here. And I don't mention it here, but I'll give you a little advance warning. Right now, the RX3000 doesn't have an option for connecting water level sensors, but we're working on that. That'll tie in through one of our module slots. So you'll have that capability, that option shortly. Data plans. Here's the data plan options. We have global and U.S. only data plans at the $150 level per year. I guess I should have said per year on each of these prices. All of these are 4G data plans. If 4G is not available, it'll roll back to 3G or 2G, depending upon what is available. And then if you want to get the maximum connection rate, you want to get those 10-minute connections, for more real-time monitoring, the data plan is $250 per year. And we do have user-supplied SIM plans. How it's going to be structured is the SP610 plan. We'll give you the 1-minute logging and 10-minute connection intervals. There is going to be a fee for that, for the HOBOlink part of the service. Then you also have to make arrangements with your cellular provider for whatever their data plan rates are in addition to that. And there's also still going to be a free plan. We still, in the interim, until these user-supplied SIM plans, we still have options for you. So contact us to see what the options are at the time you're placing your order. Let's see, there's a question about being able to download the slides. Yeah, we'll make a copy of the recording available at the end of, we'll send out an email within a few days with a link to the recording. We generally don't make the whole slides available, but if you send us a special request, we can probably do something to make some of the slides available. Some accessories to keep in mind. If you want to mount these on any of our tripods or masts, you'll need to order the U-bolts separately, pretty nominal cost. Those are good for up to masts of 1 5/8 inches. We also, of course, offer a range of tripods, 2-meter tripods, 3-meter tripods with guy wire options as kits. We have a range of choices, or you can, of course, buy your tripods and masts elsewhere. A lot of people like mounting stations on PVC pipe. That's pretty inexpensive, especially with a small station like this. It's very easy to mount them on PVC pipe. If you're going to be using it in an exposed location, we also recommend the ground wire. As I mentioned, we have an AC power adapter option. And we also have this well cap. If you're using the water level sensor, this well cap has a pass-through for the cable to go through the well cap down into it. It's designed for mounting on a 2-inch well. This has proven to be a pretty popular accessory for those folks that are monitoring water level. This is my slide that tells me that I've actually gone through the slides that I prepared, but this is a good chance for you to ask any questions that you haven't already asked or haven't already been covered. So I'll give you a few minutes to think about what questions you might have. Type them into the questions box on your control panel. You guys have been asking some great questions as we've been going along. Question on availability here. These stations are available now. We say a 1-week lead time. That's mainly because we want to program them in with a SIM so that you get a nice, fresh SIM when you get your unit. Because basically, when we test them in manufacturing, it's starting in on the data plan. We include a little bit of a grace period in the data plan so that it gets to you. You still have your full year of service available in most cases. Oh, here's a question about communications options for the MicroRX. Does it have Wi-Fi or Ethernet options? At this point, it is cellular only. We might consider other communications options in the future, but for right now, it's through 4G cellular. There's questions about contact. Actually, I have a slide that's going to follow shortly, which will provide some of the contact information for those of you who would like to get a little bit more information. So I'll show you that in a second. As a matter of fact, I can probably go to that right now so you can write down some notes. So you can still feel free to send any questions you have, but as you're writing those questions, I want to point out our website. Hopefully most of you have been there, and we've got a wealth of information there. We've got full product specifications and pricing, user manuals. We've got a whole range of webinars available that you can download at any time, tutorials for going through our software, just telling you how to do different things, self-guided training. Feel free to give us a call at any time at our 800 number if you're in the US or Canada, or call our 508 number if you're calling internationally. Here's our email address for sending questions to our sales folks, who are always more than happy to answer any questions. And then our technical support folks, if you've already got products and you're looking for help getting going, you can, the best thing to do is to go to, this is a web address that just, by going to that address, you can enter in, there's a couple qualifying questions that will help them more effectively troubleshoot your issues. So that's why we send you to the website for that. Let's see, a couple more questions came in. GPS. Our station does not include GPS. Typically, our stations are mounted in a single location. So when you deploy it, you can get the GPS location for it at that time. If you're setting it up on I mentioned that you can put our stations onto a Google map, so you can see how they relate to each other and to other geography. You can to put them on a map, it's just kind of you can zero in on I forget exactly how you do it now, but basically it's you drag an icon to the location on the map, and then you can move it around to precisely position it on the map, and then it locks it in to position there. So, and it will tell you the coordinates there, so you can kind of match the coordinates it shows to the actual location, so you're sure it really is where you think it is. Question about using in tidal areas. Are there any limitations for using these stations in tidal areas? And actually, it triggers a good point I didn't bring up, is for our water level sensors. So if you're monitoring changing tides, for example, we sell the water level sensors in a couple different variations, either with a stainless steel end on it or with a titanium end on it. And it's a little bit more expensive for the titanium versions. The titanium versions are what you'll want to use if you're using it in salt water, because the titanium doesn't get bothered by the salt water. The stainless steel can corrode over time in salt water. So we recommend if you're in salt water, use the titanium versions. So good point. Everything else on the station, the cables are all salt water tolerant. The stations are designed to be very weatherproof, so the salt water doesn't, the salt in the air doesn't bother the station at all. So and we do in fact have many of our users are using our stations in saltwater environments. There's a question about using our stations with sensors from other manufacturers. Because of the smart sensor architecture, the plug-and-play convenience, we generally recommend to use our sensors. If you have other sensors that have either a 0 to 5 volt output or a 4 to 20 milliamp output, you can typically connect them to our adapters to be able to feed them into our stations, and you can set the scaling on that. So it's a little trickier. You got to. I would recommend contacting sales to make sure you get the right configuration for if you're going to be wiring up your own specialized sensors, but you can do it. You just got to. It's a little bit more work. All right. Well, that's a great question. So I think at this point we've tapped out most of the questions. As I've mentioned, if you've got additional questions, feel free to contact us at any time. I gave you the contact information here. And at this point, I'd really like to say thanks to all of you for attending. It's been a pleasure having a chance to talk to you through the internet, and hopefully I've answered your questions and given you some good information to work on. So thanks again.